On July 18th, 64 AD. July 18th, 64 AD, a fire breaks out in the city of Rome. It began near the Circus Maximus, which was this huge stadium near the center of the city. And the fire quickly spread all over Rome, destroying all, if not all, of the city. And what wasn't destroyed was severely damaged. And so after that fire, there was a question. There was a question about how it began. How did that fire start? Well, many historians believe that it was actually agents of Nero who started the fire. And of course, when it started, he wasn't in town, was he? But then he quickly came back to Rome once the fire was in full force. You see, the reason why they think it was Nero is because he had these plans. Nero wanted to renovate the entire city. He wanted to redo everything. He wanted to redo his palace and rebuild his palace. But he feared that he could not get the support that he needed from the Roman Senate. So conveniently, guess what happened? Rome burned to the ground. And you probably have heard the story about it. And he may not have literally fiddled while he watched Rome burn, but he was very happy. He was happy that the fire helped him along to accomplish his plan. Now, after the fire died down, after it was quenched, guess what Nero needed? Nero needed someone to blame it on. And there was this suspicious group of people that were in Rome. They actually called them atheists. You know why they called them atheists? Because they refused to worship the Roman gods. And because much of the community was centered around the worship of these gods, right? Even the community organizations were centered around the worship of these gods. These strange people had very limited interaction with the community. In order to be involved in government, guess what you had to acknowledge? If you were going to be involved even in local government, you had to acknowledge that Caesar was God. So these people were not even involved in public office. And you could ask, well, what's wrong with these people? So it's believed that Nero picks the easy target. And after the fire, he says, the Christians are to blame for the burning of Rome. And that begins this thing called the Great Roman Persecution, right? The persecution of Christians that lasts for, 300 years maybe? And before long, because all of this is going and the Christians are to blame, before long they arrest the ringleaders, right? They arrest some of the ringleaders. They arrest this guy named Peter. You know him, right? And they arrest Paul because both of those guys had come to the city to start preaching Jesus. Later on in 170 AD, Dionysius, the bishop of Corinth, says that Peter and Paul were both in Rome around the same time, and they were both killed in Rome. Tradition tells us. Anybody remember the tradition about Peter? How was Peter killed? He was crucified upside down. Now, they couldn't do this with Paul because Paul was a Roman citizen. So what they wound up doing is imprisoning him for a while. This was his second time in a Roman jail. And then possibly late spring, 67 AD, Paul was taken outside of the city along this road just south of Rome. And that's where they cut his head off. Now, Jim, why are you telling us all this? Why are you talking about this? Well, I tell you this because I want you to understand we talked about this Wednesday night, right, in our Bible study. I want you to understand some context to what we're about to read. Much of the series that we've been doing here recently called Better Together, most of that has been taken out of 2 Timothy, 1st and 2 Timothy. We've looked at this relationship between Paul and Timothy, how in these relationships that we're supposed to be building with each other, we benefit from these relationships, right? We're supposed to be getting, we're supposed to be discovering how God intends to use us to further His kingdom. We're supposed to be helping each other develop discernment. We're supposed to be helping each other know what God has said and how to apply those things to our life. Well, today, as we're talking about how we are better together, I want us to look at how we find strength. We find strength to keep going. And that's what I want us to look. If you have a Bible, go ahead and open up to 2 Timothy. We're going to be looking at a whole bunch of different places there in that letter. Like I said, we've read from this letter in previous weeks. And today, I want you to understand this letter and why it was written. This is the last thing that Paul wrote. 2 Timothy is the last letter that he wrote. And like we said, he's in jail. And what does he know is coming? He knows his days are numbered, right? He knows that he's going to be killed. Paul had left Timothy in the church at Ephesus to help that church there. So Timothy was preaching at the church in Ephesus. And so this is the last letter that Paul shares, and he shares with Timothy his heart. He asks Timothy, I want you to come and see me one last time. I want you to bring Mark with you when you come. And so one of the things we notice here in this letter too is that Paul actually names names, right? Y'all know what I'm talking about when I say that? He names names, right? Like he tells of people who betrayed him. Here are the people that betrayed me. He tells of people who had harmed him in his ministry. He tells on who hindered the spread of the gospel. He tells on people who left because they loved the world more than they loved Jesus. So he names names in this book, in this letter. But in this letter, he also talks about this other group of people. And who are the other group? We see people like Onesiphorus, or Onesiphorus, depending on how you pronounce it. This guy's mentioned in 1:15 and 16. This guy's mentioned in 4:19. And Rome, think about Rome right now. Rome is a very dangerous town, right? For Christians. Once that persecution started, and this guy comes there to bring aid to Paul during his imprisonment. And he helps Paul to keep going. Near the end of the letter, there are a lot of people mentioned there too, although here's a guy that gets told on, right? Demas deserted Paul in his ministry. That's 4, 9, and 10. But there are two other people that are mentioned there. And most likely, these few people didn't desert Paul, but they were actually sent off to preach at different churches and different locations. And we read of Crescens, who was in Galatia, and Titus. Yes, that's the guy that Paul writes a letter to, right? Titus goes to Dalmatia. Paul says he sent Tychicus to Ephesus, most likely to fill in for Timothy as Timothy comes to Rome. We know of Mark. That's a guy who was refused by Paul when he was a young man. Later, when he becomes an adult, he becomes a helper, right, for Paul. We read there even of Luke. Yes, that's the Luke who wrote the book of Acts and the Gospel of Luke. He was discipled by Paul. And we learn in this letter that he's the only one of those traveling companions that are currently with Paul. So here you have all these people, very much like Timothy. These are traveling companions of Paul who were sent out into the different churches that were planted in these different areas to preach there. Erastus was in Corinth, Trophimus, we learn about this guy. He got sick and had to stay in Miletus. We read about Priscilla and Aquila, who are currently ministering in the church of Ephesus. Wonderful Christian couple ministering together in the church of Ephesus. And these are all the people who, even after Paul goes to be with the Lord, what are these people going to be doing? These are all the people who are going to continue the work, right, of spreading the gospel. And because Paul knew that the work would continue after his death, it helped Paul to keep going. It helped him to remain faithful. And then right at the end of this letter, he names some more people, which were probably Roman Christians, people he knew, people he shared life with, people at the church at Rome. Eubulus, Pudens, Linus, Claudia. And then he says, all the brothers and sisters send their greetings. And this shows that though Paul had some struggles with people in ministry, he had this other group of people that were there, and they were a part of his life, and they encouraged him even as he approached the end. They encouraged him to not give up. They encouraged him to remain faithful. And this is why we have this wonderful epitaph, if you will, from Paul, right? It's like he gets to write what goes on his headstone. And what does he say? This is 2 Timothy 4, 7 and 8. Here's what he says. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. And now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day, and not only me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. What did Paul say he did? He fought the good fight, didn't he? All the way to the end. He fought the good fight all the way to the end. He finished the race. He didn't stop in the middle. He didn't even stop near the end. He finished the race all the way to the finish line. He kept the faith. Why is he writing this to Timothy? He's writing it because he's encouraging Timothy to do the same thing, right? So not only do we need to be examples of people who remain faithful to the end, we need to be encouraging each other to be faithful to the end. Brothers and sisters, remain faithful. Don't give up. Don't quit. Everybody say, don't quit. You ready? Don't quit. Because that's the easy thing to do, isn't it? It's easy just to give up and quit. It's like, there's a story, it was in a book back in 1938 called Think and Grow Rich. The guy who wrote it, Napoleon Hill, tells of a man named Darby, and Darby caught gold fever. It was back during the gold rush in Colorado, right, during the mid-1800s. And so after weeks of digging, Darby finally struck gold. And he's like, great, now I need machinery to bring all of this ore to the surface. So he quietly covered everything up in the mine, traveled home to Williamsburg, Maryland, and told his family about what he had discovered. So they all borrowed the money for the needed machinery. They had it shipped out to Colorado. They went to Colorado. The whole family was there and began to work on this mine. After just a few cars of gold were brought up, they made enough to pay off the equipment, but then something happened. There was no more gold. They kept digging and they kept drilling, and nothing. The Darbys had come to the end of their rainbow, and there was no more gold. So what did they do? Disappointed? The family sold their equipment to a junk dealer for just a few $100s, and they went back home to Maryland. This junk dealer called in a mining engineer to help him turn on the equipment, and he dug just 3 more feet where the Darbys had given up. Anybody want to guess what he found? He struck gold. Not only that, it was the biggest deposit of gold ore in the state of Colorado. This guy pulls up millions and millions and millions of dollars from the ground just 3 feet from where the Darbys had given up. Don't quit. Say it with me. Don't quit. And this is one of the main functions that we have together as the body of believers, as the church. This is one of the things we're supposed to be doing, one of the services we are providing to each other, right? And being together, because this makes us better. As a body of believers, we are supposed to be holding each other accountable. I know we don't like that word, accountability, but we are. We're supposed to be holding each other accountable. Do you know when it's easiest to quit? You know when it's easiest to quit? When no one notices, right? Now, I'm going to say this and understand church attendance is not the only gauge of the condition of someone's faith. But you know what? It's a pretty basic one. It's a pretty easy one. It's actually one of the first indicators when someone is moving spiritually in the wrong direction, right? Is when they stop coming to church. And I want to ask you this morning, very simply, just look around. Look around you. Who do you not see this morning? Now, they might be out of town. I know several people have told me this morning where they are before they left, right? Some people do that. They tell me when they're not going to be here. Other people have obligations. Sometimes that happens. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm asking is, who is it that has just stopped? For a while, we blamed COVID, right? There are some people who actually used COVID as an opportunity to quit going to church. Not just here, but that's a fact that's been shared by churches all over the country. People used it as an opportunity to kind of exit, right? And they'll tell you when you call them or approach them, well, I haven't quit Jesus. Well, yeah, but you sure removed yourself from a place where you're supposed to find accountability for following Jesus. You've removed yourself from that environment. Last Wednesday in the Bible study, we talked a little bit about the context of the book of Hebrews. And that letter is called Hebrews because it was written to Jewish Christians. And anybody want to guess what they were getting ready to do? These Jewish Christians? They were getting ready to give up. They were getting ready to quit. Being a Christian is a hard thing, and they hadn't matured a lot in the time they had been Christians. So you know what? It'd be easier for us just to go back to the way things were. It'd be easier for us just to go back to Judaism, right? Go back to being Jews. So here's an entire letter that's written as an encouragement that, hey, your decision to follow Jesus, your decision was the best thing you ever did. Jesus is the best thing you ever found. That's what Hebrews is about. Anybody agree with that sentiment? Jesus is the best thing you've ever found. Following Jesus is better than going back to Judaism. And here's what he says. Therefore, brothers and sisters, this is Hebrews 10, 19 through 25. Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, that is his body, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with a full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience and having our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess. For he who promised is faithful. And let us now consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as we see the day approaching. Do you get what he says there? Jesus has done so much for us. He has made it so that we can be with the Father. There is a new and living way to enter into the presence of God. Our consciences can be cleared and we can be washed clean. We need to be challenging one another. We need to be supporting one another. We need to be encouraging one another. We need to be spurring one another on to love and good deeds. Don't quit. Say it with me. Don't quit. Don't give up. Because we're almost there. We're almost there. When things go wrong, and they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high and you want to smile but you have to cry, when stress is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver line in a cloud of doubt. And you can never tell how close you are. It may be near when it seems so far. So stay in the fight when you're hardest hit. And when things seem worse, that's when you must never, never quit. As Jesus is there and he's teaching his disciples, he's teaching about the end of all things, and he prophesies. He prophesies about the coming Christian persecution, but then he also says this in Matthew 24, 12 and 13. He says, because of the increase of wickedness, what will happen? Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Don't give up. Don't move backward in your faith. As a group, as a body of believers, let's move forward. Let's grow in the things of God. Let's stand firm to the end. And let's be a group of people who are helping each other remain strong so that we can make it to the end of this race. And let's be able to say with the Apostle Paul, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. Don't quit. Because we're better together. We're going to go ahead and sing a song of decision this morning. If you want to make a decision for the Lord, you come forward today as we all stand up together and as we sing this song.